at least, yeah, there will be some facts and some proposals and some discussions, perhaps. This part will be split up into two parts. We're going to talk a bit about the DORA metrics themselves, and we're going to talk about how they can be represented through Eiffel events. The DORA metrics have been around for a while, but I think it's worth just looking at their definitions one more time, just to make sure everyone is on the same page. But they were brought up by something that's called the DevOps Research and Assessment Group. I think it's part of Google Cloud, something like that. Essentially, the question that they wanted to answer was, can we find some metrics or key performance indicators that actually seem to correlate between what are we doing well in DevOps and how well is the whole organization? So they wanted to find metrics with a strong correlation that, like, how efficient the companies at getting stuff to market, and how well received their products are, etc., etc. So after talking to a whole bunch of different companies and a whole bunch of different engineers, they came up with 4 metrics that they call like the key metrics for DevOps. And the first one is deployment frequency, and it's defined like, considering the main application or system that you are developing, how often does your organization deploy code to production or release it to users, depending on what sort of workflow you have? So yeah, it's simply how often can you make new releases? Second one is lead time for changes. So this is, again, considering the main application or system that your organization is developing, how long does it take to go from some code change being committed to that code successfully running in production, or again, being released to a customer? So these are more like workflow related, I guess. The coming two ones are perhaps more related to quality or some aspect of it. And the first one is change failure rate, which again, for your main application or system, what percentage of the changes that you deploy to production or release to users result in some sort of degradation or like user encountering issues, or your operations team noticing that it's a lot less stable than it was before, and in such a way that it actually requires some action to fix it, remediation. And the last one is time to restore. So once you have discovered an issue, how long does it generally take to restore service when you have something that impacts users? So these 4 metrics are, I think Google refers to them as 4 keys. I think that's pretty much the same thing, right?
4 keys is implementation, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, DORA metrics is what they are usually refer to. Sorry?
No. That's another thing.
Yeah. So if we say then that these are good indicators of how well your organization will be doing, then of course it would be interesting to see how well can we calculate these metrics through Eiffel. And let's start with looking at deployment frequency. So since Eiffel is very flow related, in my view, I think this is quite doable. So let's say that we have a situation like this. Our current situation is that we have some environment, we call it production, where we have some version of a server running. The font is very small, but it's actually not that relevant. And we have some form of orchestrator that is responsible for keeping track of the service and upgrading it. And then we want to get a new version of a service, and we want to represent 2 different things. One, that we do an upgrade of a service in the environment called production. So we take the old version, tear it down, take the new version, bring it up, and keep that running. But also that we add a new environment and deploy the service there. So technically this would then, I guess, be counted as 2 deployments. And both of these can be represented in Eiffel. The simple cases where we already have the environment, then we can just send artifact deploy. So this is one of the new events. I think Magnus talked more about that earlier. And when we want to bring up a new environment, we have an event called environment defined and an event called artifact deploy. I should put a disclaimer here. If anyone around the table has a different idea on what events should be sent, please yell out. This is very much not the official statement in any way. This is how I would have done it. Important to remember, though, is that you can't just go and look at all artifact deployed event, because you can have multiple artifacts, and as the metric was defined, it's for the main application or service that you're developing. So you may not want to count when you have deployed a new build script, for instance. That doesn't count. But fortunately, they are artifact linked. So you find the artifact created message that belongs to this new image or whatever you're building, and then track the messages that relate to that one, and you'll be fine. But looking at these artifact deploy messages, an observer that has access to Eiffel messages can then calculate the deployment frequency. Yeah. So that brings us to the next one, which is lead time for changes. Here, Eiffel links really become a powerful feature. Say that we have then a new change coming in, and we have this observer again who wants to calculate lead time for changes. Well, depending on how your pipeline looks, there will be a bunch of steps. Probably first step is something related to a source code management system. Probably you would have source change submitted being sent from that. Maybe the build system sends 2 messages, composition defined, pointing to the source change, and then artifact created when it's actually built something, pointing to this composition defined. From the registry, you might have an artifact published message, but we don't actually need it in this change, so I didn't include it in the picture. And then it gets deployed somewhere, and then you have artifact deployed. And then for an observer getting this artifact deploy message, they can then trace backwards from artifact deployed to artifact created to composition defined to source change submitted. And since the Eiffel event has a timestamp, it would be quite trivial just compare the timestamp of source change submitted to the timestamp of artifact deployed. I'm skipping some parts here because the definition actually said successfully deployed into production, and artifact deployed doesn't really say if something was successfully deployed. But when to count something as successful, that's a bit vague. You would have to have some definition of that. Maybe you where you send an announcement if the server has been upgraded and it's been running fine for like 10 minutes. Maybe that's your definition. But if we say that artifact deployed will be sent once the health check has passed that service, then this should be good enough.
We had a quite extensive discussion about that when we talked about artifact deployment, whether we should, when is something deployed? Is it when kubectl completes, or when we actually have sort of verified that yes, the deployment itself was actually successful, but we didn't define that in the protocol.
Yeah.
So that's up to the implementation.
Yeah. Yes. So this one is perhaps one of the most straightforward ones. And again, this it shows one of the powers of Eiffel links. The 2 following ones are not as clear from an Eiffel perspective. So if we're talking about detecting when incidents occur, there are many places where we can detect an incident. We have this set up as well, or again, we have the new version of the server running both in the production environment and our new environment. Maybe we have a monitor connected to the new environment, doing something like could be like Prometheus or something. We have the orchestrator still keeping track. And then an incident could come from many different places. It could come from the orchestrator, because it's usually, if it's like Kubernetes again, maybe keeps track of the pods and see if they are healthy or not. It might report that an incident has occurred. The monitor can, of course, detect that an incident has occurred by it detecting that it can no longer talk to the server. The server itself can decide that it's not feeling very well at the moment. And potentially it could even be operations team or users or something that says, hey, this is not working. They click some feedback button or run some script and that produces an incident event. But it would be enough for an observer who already knows how many changes are made, which it would from the previous metrics, to basically just do a division of the number of changes to the number of issues or incidents that are reported. There is no incident event in Eiffel. We had a little bit of a discussion yesterday. There is the issue defined and verified, but it doesn't quite fit for this purpose. So current thinking is maybe we can use announcement published. It's very generic. It doesn't really carry much data, and you would have to maybe abuse the links a little bit. But if you wanted to calculate this, add any new events, maybe this is the way to do it. The same sort of applies for the fourth one, which is time to restore. So this,
Yeah, just have a reflection on the previous one. I think it's, I don't exactly remember the description, but I mean, one way you could also model it is that making the assumption that you're actually creating an issue when an incident has happened.
Mm.
And then you could, I think, kind of model it with the issue defined event, maybe. But then, that's kind of under that assumption, I guess. But
yeah, we had a little bit of a discussion around this, Emil. I think you were. Yeah.
Can I just mention something? It's sort of maybe very obvious and has been there for a while, but there is something called operational extensions to that particular events. It's 2000. It contains basically everything you want.
Mm.
But it's not the proper part of the official protocol, but it certainly seems that everything there now seems to be needed. So we should use that as a source, please, unless it's being used in some way.
So I hope it's not used that way because of the standard, the matureness of it. But anyway, we should.
So probably
for the deployment event.
The basic things are still the same.
For the deployment event, we did look at it, and we should probably do the same for if we want to introduce another incident event of some sort.
Operational incidents are there, at least sort of, the beginning of it, but it needs to be refined with states and so forth. So.
But then referring to your comment, Jonathan, about why not use the issue defined event. Well, the discussion was in the city events too, when we created the incident event there, because there is an incident event. And I obviously thought that, well, let's introduce an issue defined event because that's would be more natural from my perspective. But we wanted there to declare when the problem occurred in the system and not when someone has written a ticket for it. So there might not be a definition yet with the URI to a ticketing system, but there is CPU load is 100%. I mean, we have found an incident somewhere or misuse of some service. We need to report this incident, but we might not have the ticketing system for it. We might have some dashboard and then some human creates a ticket for it, or some other system monitors the system and creates a ticket. But the incident has occurred earlier, probably.
But would the incident also cover the case when you have a person finding a visual bug and reporting it as well? I mean, that would cover both those cases, as both the automatic.
But the incident, on the other hand, in city events does not contain the reference to an issue either. So there is no issue defined event in city events yet. There is no way to, well, a bit in the issue incident resolved event in city events, there might be a field for referring to a Jira ticket that was used when resolving the incident, an optional field. Because it might not be obvious that you need a ticket for it. You can maybe just press restart on the server.
It's
The incident is resolved without a ticket.
but maybe both of those cases can be modeled with one event. I mean, the same event.
Yeah, but from Citizen's perspective, the term issue wasn't really the term we were looking for. And I think if we misuse the Eiffel protocol to also use the issues for incidents, it might not be semantically easily understood.
Yeah, because I think what we also would like to do in the future is to kind of tie both, issues and also a confidence level with an actual requirement. Kind of. So then we also want to tie it back to a requirement from a customer or like a definition of what things should be. So
Now we are approaching the value stream management rather.
Yeah,
As well. Talk about where do we declare requirements and how do we reference them?
Yeah.
So changes.
maybe that doesn't need to be modeled like with the protocol as such. I mean, that's something you can do like outside, I guess, but yeah, that's what we probably want to be.
We have in the source change events, we have references to issue defined events. So if you use DORA both for bugs and features, both for bugs and requirements, you could reference those from your source change events, and then in some way you are through the issue links you are referring to requirements if they are in DORA. But that's as well as a misuse, I would say, in some way. But that possibility is there today.
Maybe a confidence level could be used.
Indicating by the discussion of what you mentioned is that there seems to be no straightforward way to represent sort of this incident part here.
Yeah.
But you can probably do a quick and dirty solution by hogging or temporary usage of an Eiffel event to represent the instance as such, but probably not a long-term solution. There needs to be a evolution in the middle of how this particular DORA mesh.
Yeah.
And the announcement event is probably closest enough that we can get to.
Yeah, so the announcement event is very generic, but for now, that's a good thing because that means we can abuse it to signal this information. But no, it's not a long-term solution. It should definitely not be like the standardized recommended solution. And the same goes for time to restore. So like once we
One
know
more comment on
when an
the
incident. Sorry, is there a comment online? I think the
Yes.
audio was super low. Yes.
Yeah,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Could confidence level be an option to be used for the incidents?
That is an
Confidence
interesting-
level with a failure verdict, say.
That's great.
It's not be successful or failed. I mean, it doesn't fit 100% either, I would say, but yeah,
It's a different kind of abuse.
different kind of abuse. Maybe almost equally
It depends on the
abused.
object, doesn't it?
I think it
Agree.
depends on where the input come from. I mean, if you have, for example, specific test case that indicates that something failed, or you have a customer feedback, or if you have something specific that is the cause of deciding that this was a problem, then it could be defined at competence levels. But if it's more like a general anything could happen thing, then maybe it's more of an abuse.
But it is an interesting point because definitely we are less confident than we were before that this product is any good because it's now crashing.
Exactly. Yes.
But it is crashing rather than a test case failing. So the system is crashing. That's a different thing than that some tests has failed for it. But yeah, that's the one. So you can get
Yes. So once we can identify when issues or incidents are found, then restoring it's again like there are many different actors that can do it. The orchestrator can restore it by restarting it. Monitor can find some resolution, maybe, or could also trigger the orchestrator maybe, or find some other thing to do. Maybe the server can heal itself somehow. Maybe the operations team do something. But again, it's not super tricky if we can signal when the incident is resolved to understand how long time it takes to restore. But again, we have no good event for this today. So the idea was to use announcement published again, because announcement published contains like a status enum where you can say if something is resolved or closed, I think it is, announcement published. Yeah, so this is like a quick and dirty walkthrough of how we could potentially signal or measure these metrics using Eiffel. Again, for the first two, the flow is quite clear. For the last two, some dirty stuff right now, but something we can look into more for the future. And these operation extensions is a good basis for looking at things, I think. But what is clear, I think, when looking at this is that when you have a system, since this involves both the development part and the operations part, it's becomes even more helpful to have a standardized language, because you have all these different tools for keeping track of source code and building and orchestrating and doing various things. And if you want to calculate these metrics as an observer, you either need to integrate with 65 different tools, or you need to have Eiffel as the common language. That was it for a quick run through of DORA metrics and how they could be run using Eiffel. Any questions or comments?
Just a reflection. So DORA, it comes from the DevOps concept and mindset, and that's more for a CI/CD pipeline, which is service delivery. So you have a DevOps team who is bringing the engineering development concepts in the operations. And so it's mostly on the operational side, or on the DevOps metrics, or the DORA metrics to calculate things. The last two metrics, that's totally. So if I see today, like in CD events, the deployment event is more service oriented. So you have this like rollback, and then you have incident event, and that to specifically define this change failure rate and how quickly we can restore service. So like Kubernetes states like how often you deploy and then do a rollback, then that's a, and then how often you deploy and then that creates an incident, and when you resolve that incident by any means. So so if we need to do this, then yeah, we need to bring those concepts also in the protocol. Otherwise, there is other process like ITL, and the current protocol fits well if you calculate those metrics of ITL, but they are very process oriented. And then things like confidence levels and all can bring those ITL metrics in place. So,
yeah. And it is
different use case.
Definitely. So coming from, I guess many of us are working in organizations where nothing gets released on a daily basis. Yes. I'm working with car development, and usually, like we're talking about now, about setting up pipelines for cars that will be delivered in 2025 to make sure that we have enough time to stabilize the software. And we would be horrible in some of these metrics, but I think we can at least calculate the metrics on a smaller scale. Like we have incidents in CI, perhaps not incidents in the way that we are deploying some products and that product is crashing, but CI goes down.
Yeah.
And how good are we at bringing CI back up again? So, yeah, I think if we twist the definitions of the DORA metrics a little bit, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was my guess, that we can twist, like we don't take it like exactly DevOps, and it says like, okay, between production and all.
Yeah.
For example, in our CI, we have a staging environment where all different microservices, and we say, this is production for us.
Yeah.
And after this, a product is formed and we do more verification and release. And then we can calculate the metrics between them.
Yeah.
Like how often a commit goes there and create TRs or those things. Yeah.
And I think it is worth thinking about that, because again, these four metrics were not chosen at random. They were chosen because they have a very strong correlation between the success of an organization and basically how well they rank on these metrics. There is, I know on the DORA homepage, there's like I think it's called a quick survey or something like that. You can go and answer for your team or organization for these metrics, either by calculating it or guesswork. You will get like some feedback on where you are comparing with other companies. Again, it's not easy to compare between organizations in different domains because again, like publishing an update to an online photo gallery app is not the same as releasing a new telecom backbone, but I think at least it's worth thinking in these terms.
I wonder, the more lightweight approach we did with artifact deployment, if that's a limitation. Because if we were to introduce an incident, I mean, in a way, we more, rather than perhaps to sort of report the incident on the service itself, but we're not modeling the service, we're only saying that deployment of an artifact took place. We're not defining the service itself.
It does link to an environment, but of course there can be many server instances running on that environment. Or
it could be, but I mean, you have to be able to send the incident, to report the incident, you need to locate the actual deployment that took place. And that's of course possible, but I don't know if it's, in a way it would have been nice, at least in that case, to have that, so to have like a service defined that you would locate, and then you would deploy artifacts to that service. But I mean, we discussed that and we rejected it because it just grew terribly complicated. But maybe that problem is back and going to bite us. I don't know. But I think for now it'll do to report it on the deployment. But maybe that's sort of the next step. If we want to take Eiffel in this direction, it seems pretty clear that we want to be able to represent incidents. So that's maybe something for the next edition.
Other questions or comments?
We're planning to implement this in a way. I mean, this is sort of semi-practical. So do you have any hard plan for this?
Not on our side, no. I've actually held a pretty similar presentation for CD events, which has also gone through this journey quite recently, or like a year ago, or something like that. There, we did it because there was a concrete need to, some companies wanted to start measuring these things using CD events. But I would say we saw quite a lot of interest when we were on various conferences presenting that the DORA metrics can actually be calculated or measured through events. There was some buzz to that. People seem to understand how they can do it because they had understood that the metrics are important, but they also found it quite difficult to measure. So
it just proves that it's very simple. Once you have the definition of the events, doing the actual work, the calculation, the maths.
Yeah,
it's very simple.
Yeah, so it could be one vector for finding new users of Eiffel. Since the DORA metrics are quite well known, having a clear sort of onboarding way for people to say, okay, if what you want to do is to be able to calculate DORA metrics, here's how you do it using Eiffel. You get your producers to send these messages. You put this event repository in place. You design an observer like this, then you can calculate the metrics. That could be one way to go.
And the beauty of all, in that sense, is that it is sort of non-disturbing to add these things on. Tap on an existing system, submit a few events from whatever system, integrate it, and then have something that calculates, with DORA, take out these events and calculate it. It is very sort of risk-free into any production system at all. So it probably should be very appealing. Yeah. Anyone wants to integrate that type of sort of non-disturbing measurement system.
That's a very good point, because it wouldn't require you to build your pipelines based on Eiffel events. You need to push some events when certain things happen, and then you can have an observer calculating things.
And sort of the non-disturbing part, I presume, for a lot of people who don't really want to start messing around with something that is fragile in its own way. It's sort of risk-free. You get a lot of values with it.
Yeah,